It's the time of year when we're all scrambling to do holiday shopping. And this year, for a couple of reasons, it's even harder than normal.
Well, now everyone knows the cost of living is going up.
And then there's this.
Primary schools, early learning centres and parents are all on alert tonight in the wake of a nationwide recall of popular play sand that may contain asbestos.
There's lots of reporting on that sand. Today, though, I'm looking at a broader story about product safety, especially for children. Because the more I've learned, the more it seems that while the asbestos sand might be a more extreme situation than normal, safety recalls, especially for toys, aren't unheard of. You don't have to look hard to find headlines about dangerous toys. The Warehouse, facing charges over Roo Crew take-apart vehicle. Australian test reveals unsafe toys purchased from Shine, AliExpress, eBay, and Amazon. Kmart recalls toys after reports children choked on small screws. I'm Gwen McClure, and today on The Detail, I'm looking at what laws protect us, whether they're working, and what to look out for when buying for kids. And which companies Consumer NZ says just don't go near. First,
Gemma Rasmussen, Head of Research and Advocacy at Consumer NZ.
Let's just start with the basics. What are the laws in place to protect consumers?
So New Zealand has a number of different laws in place to protect consumers when it comes to product safety. The first one is the Fair Trading Act, and that means that it's illegal to supply unsafe goods or misleadingly market them or really fail to disclose any required safety information. We also have the Consumer Guarantees Act, which means that goods need to be of acceptable quality when they're supplied. The other thing is that we have specific mandatory product safety standards for higher risk product categories. And this is things like toys, children's nightwear, cots, things like that. And that's because there has been this historical risk in this space. And it means that suppliers really need to comply with these standards. Also for toys under 3, there is like a safety standard, and that is really reflective of the way in which children are using toys, putting them in their mouth, making sure that parts don't come out, and that's an internationally recognized safety standard. So that's sort of a real baseline of what we're dealing with.
So great, that's good. I guess my question is, are these laws really working? I mean, obviously, we have big scares like this asbestos sand, but then also little things all the time. I mean, are these laws actually stopping unsafe products from being sold here?
I think that the issue is that the product landscape has changed so much in the last 5 years. And I think that the way in which our legislation has been written is really not reflective of the way in which we are shopping now. I was at a product safety conference a few weeks ago in Korea, and there were a number of countries that were present, and we were talking about product safety issues. And it's not just us. A lot of countries are scratching their heads and trying to figure out how to solve this. And I think that one of the big problems is that so much of what we buy is online, and then if it's coming into the country, what's the appropriate way to vet this and ensure that it's safe? Should it be sitting with, border security? That would be insane considering how much is coming from other shores. How do you hold online retailers accountable if they're coming from another country and then suddenly they're breaking New Zealand laws? If you're thinking about the sheer amount of what's coming in, it's really tricky. And I think that if you're looking at the product ecosystem, like the reality of the ways in which people are shopping in New Zealand, I think that New Zealand's legislation is probably not fit for purpose. If you look at the number one retailer for New Zealanders, it's Temu. And in some ways, I understand that, because if we look at cost of living concerns, they have doubled in the last 4 years. People are feeling in crisis. And I think when things like Christmas come around, your kids have these wants and needs, and there might not be a lot of money to go around. So naturally, you're looking at somewhere like Temu. But in relation to the ways in which our legislation falls short, I think that there's a lot of responsibility that relies on the suppliers and importers, and we have no real government certification or pre-approval systems. So we are relying on the honesty of suppliers, and a lot of our standards are voluntary. So there are these areas that I mentioned, like children's nightwear and things like that where there's been a history of risk. So that's mandatory. But a lot of the products aren't. They're voluntary. And often it's that the enforcement and recall is happening once something has landed on a shelf. So we're sort of in a model where until something goes wrong,
Right.
there's not really a lot that's happening. And that's quite a dangerous model because it means that potentially someone is getting hurt or injured. I think the other issue is that global supply chains are really complex. So actually having visibility around that supply chain can mean that enforcement is really difficult to check. And I can talk a little bit more about how some other jurisdictions are doing this a little bit better. But in short, our government hasn't prioritised putting the resources into ensuring that we actually have a system that is really reflective of the retail experience in New Zealand.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that. But I guess first, so it does seem that it's sort of self-regulated, right? I mean, I heard an interview with a spokesperson from MB, and he said, basically, our system depends on voluntary compliance.
The responsibility is on the seller to make sure that these things come through. It is a generally regulated market.
So can they bring in whatever they like, Ian, as long as they say this is safe? It's all good.
No, of course they can't. There are standards which apply, and you're bringing into this discussion, Lisa, a massive range of products.
Well, let's just talk about sand then, if it makes it easier. If you bring in some coloured sand from overseas, as a parent purchasing this for my kid to play with, or, as has happened in this case, a school or childcare centre purchasing it, how do they know it has been tested and doesn't contain anything yucky or dangerous?
It depends on the product and it depends on the standard that applies in each case. But no retailer is going to want to sell anything that contains something that is dangerous.
So if someone's not compliant, what then? I mean, can you basically, as a retailer, do whatever you want unless you get caught?
Well, it's not good business practice for a retailer to do whatever they want because of the reputational risk they face if something does go wrong. I think it can be really hard as a retailer where you are bringing in multiple products. With the kinetic sand asbestos issue, what really surprised me was that it was a retailer like Kmart, because often these really big retailers actually have quite rigorous systems because they know that the reputational and economic risk is so major to them. And really, I was sort of anticipating a product safety issue happening at one of those like $2 to $5 stores or something really big happening through an online retailer like Temu or Shine. So the fact that that happened, that was kind of an interesting one. I mean, we have seen that. So as an example, we have tested face paints. In 2014, we found a face paint that had extremely high levels of lead.
Wow.
So that's an example of where we've conducted a really expensive test and then found that there's an issue, and then that has led to a recall. There is a massive trust model in New Zealand, and how effective that is questionable.
So tell me then what some of the other jurisdictions that you're aware of, what they are doing that works better.
I think that if you were to look at the EU, they are really the leaders, probably, in terms of the way in which they are tackling product safety. So the way in which they operate is they're sort of trying to create a marketplace where the guardrails are on and there's the assumption that the shopper can really shop with safety. So they have things like government certification schemes. They've expanded what chemicals are regulated. They have a greater focus on imports and online marketplace surveillance. They really have a focus on traceability. So they're introducing something called a digital product passport that all products need to have, and it means that it sort of ties up the regulators and the customs authorities and the market surveillance bodies. So when a problematic item comes through, you can get this identification of the importer, the batch, the distributor, and then that can lead to recalls and enforcement. And I think that the great thing about this is that it's a solution that is kind of considering all of these different factors, from the supply chain to the sale to when it's coming into the country to how you actually address recall. With product safety, there's never going to be one like silver bullet to fix this. And so the EU, they're really looking at lots of different ways to try and crack down on this. And I think that what they're doing is really quite remarkable. Even in Australia, Canada, we can see that they have a higher focus on transparency, and their regulators are possibly more involved than what we have in New Zealand. So I think that one of the major things is actually tying up different countries so that we're in communication and there are recall systems available, because it's a global marketplace now, and if we're getting products, those products are probably being sold in France and sold elsewhere. So that is also a slightly trickier one, being able to join up all these different countries. But there are certainly examples where other countries are doing really well, and we could stand to learn from that. But that really does come down to government prioritisation as well. Like MB and the Commerce Commission and other government bodies are only as good as the resourcing that our government provides.
Yeah, well, and on that, on the sand specifically, it seems like there's been a fair amount of sort of passing the buck. The Ministry of Education told me that they've published advice, but they're kind of not the front line in terms of comms on it. And it's up to individual school boards for cleanup what their risk tolerance is when it comes to cleanup. WorkSafe says talk to MB. MB told me that they've said everything that they have to say so far, which, is fair enough in some ways. They've done quite a bit of talking. Yeah. But then meanwhile, no one's stepping up to pay for cleanup for, individual families who might need some help, or for schools or daycare centers. That's all on them. So, I mean, do you feel in your job at Consumer like New Zealand is taking this sort of thing seriously enough?
I mean, I think that we really do need to be taking it far more seriously. I see risk in our horizon with the way in which our marketplace is now operating. I think in the instance of the asbestos sand, it is disappointing to see that the buck has been passed a little bit. And maybe this is me coming from consumer, but I really do feel that Kmart is the one that should be standing up and taking the responsibility. It sounds like their comms have been very limited, like they're trying to sweep it under the carpet a bit. They should be really responsible for any costs incurred to families if there is cleanup and asbestos proven to be found. And the way in which they have responded to this, it seems like it falls short.
We've talked about this a little bit, but is it just sand that we're worried about? I mean, when people are out doing their Christmas shopping now, as a parent, it's in my head, it's not just the kinetic sand, but should I be worried about chalk, Play-Doh? You just mentioned face paint, obviously things with button batteries, and that's a kind of a different thing. Something else I read, a toy, and this was I think from Temu or Shine, had higher formaldehyde levels than it should in it. What else should we be looking out for?
I think that there's a higher level of risk when you're purchasing products like slime, sands, doughs, face paints, craft products, because there's the assumption that any product that lands on our shelves have been rigorously tested to ensure that they're safe. And we can see with the kinetic sand and say with some of Consumer NZ's historical testing into face paints that sometimes things fall through the cracks. So there is a little bit more of a risk in that craft area, I would say. I guess the other thing, in terms of guidance for parents when they're thinking about Christmas shopping, we would say don't buy from these cheaper online marketplaces like Temu and Shine. Like, I get that cost of living is really tough and there might be other things that you want to buy from there, but when it comes to kids' products, don't do it. There's a really high failure rate in safety testing, and we don't think it's worth the risk. We've done some testing. There's been multi-country testing of products from Temu and Shine, and the results are never good. So our guidance there is just really err on the side of caution and stay away from marketplaces like that. I know that people will say, well, okay, but there's been this issue at Kmart. So what if I'm shopping on our shores, and how can I really be safe? What I would say is that some of the bigger, more established toy brands can be a little bit safer, and that they usually follow international standards and they have really internal high quality control and safety and testing protocols. And that obviously they have this reputational incentive, because if a really big brand has a recall or a safety scandal, then that really, can impact them in terms of their bottom dollar. So There probably are bigger brands. I'm talking about the likes of Lego, Hasbro, Mattel, Spin Master, Hape, big recognizable brands like that. They are often a safe bet. The other thing I would say is, there's the emergence of these like $2, $5, $10 bargain stores around the country. I would sort of almost put them in a kind of similar category to places like Temu and Shine, in that I think there is risk with parts coming out, button batteries, things like that. So I'd tread really carefully when it comes to purchasing toys or craft products from places like that. But also, if you're purchasing, inspect the product. Think about the age of the person that you're buying for. Are there any parts that can come out? Are there batteries that you need to be worried about? Really err on the side of caution with craft. That's sort of my general advice. I know it can be really hard when people have limited budgets and maybe limited places that they can shop, but that's the general advice I'd have.
Mareta Hunt is the director of Safekids Aotearoa, which focuses on preventing unintentional injuries in kids. They ran a campaign last month about safe toys. Mareta says, regardless of where we buy toys, a good guide is to follow the 6 S's.
So the 6 S's stand for size. So size is really important, ensuring that toys are large enough so that they're not going to be put in there or lodged in the mouth, ears and nose. Another one is that surface check. So you're looking for smooth finishes. There's no sharp edges. It doesn't seem like it's easy to break off. That avoids any kind of cuts and pierce. String safety. So avoid toys with long cords and strings. And another one is supervision and safety instructions. So checking that the packaging has the right instructions, specifically the age appropriateness of the toy, and knowing which toys are important to have adult supervision with. Sound being volume control, so make sure that toys aren't too loud for the little ears of children. Another one too is that often when toys are too loud, you can't really hear what else is going on in that room, especially if you're not eyes on. Swallow risk as well. So as I mentioned before, the size matters. This one's a little bit more around the button batteries and small parts that could be ingested or lodged and create really serious burns. So that's the kind of umbrella messaging that we're providing to families, particularly as there's been quite a few product recalls, as you've stated.
What are sort of some of the biggest concerns that you have, or the biggest sources of preventable injury or death that you're seeing in kids or that you're hearing about?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you mentioned, death, that's a real serious one. So there's certain campaigns that we've done, and that's why we've got string safety in there and swallow risk around button battery burns, high-powered magnets.
These magnets look harmless, colorful, shiny, and marketed as stress toys. But for a toddler, they look just like candy.
Warnings about the dangers of small magnetic toys after hundreds of children are rushed to hospital every year after swallowing them. 1 in 10 of those admitted to accident and emergency departments needed life-saving operations.
By the time they prepped her and got her into surgery, the magnets had moved and done considerable damage. They went as fast as they could. They couldn't have gone any quicker. But the magnets were going faster.
Those are really serious injuries that can lead to death. The other ones around hospitalisations, our biggest concerns is that there's around 1,200 injuries that we're seeing annually, and this is based on claims data. This isn't our hospitalisation data, it's our claims data.
What was that specifically? What is 1,200 injuries from toys, or what is that?
Oh, yes. So the way that figure is broken down, the 1,200, is based on toys, and that's what the keywords or terms that were used.
I've heard some advice that parents should avoid buying things on Shine or Temu, etc. But obviously there are, a lot of families, especially this year in this cost of living crisis, there are people who are going to be looking for more affordable options, and a lot of those do come from imports. So is your message really that even if you're buying from, it doesn't matter where you're buying from, stick to those 6 S's, and that's how you're going to keep your kids safe?
Absolutely. It's right on the money. We would advise that you stick to the 6 S's when you're buying from international e-commerce platforms, there's no real guarantee that just because you're buying it in New Zealand that it's safe. Just in September, there was an article released by RNZ that spoke to some fines that were given out to certain wholesalers and importers for the types of toys that they're selling that didn't meet the standards. And so those are also in our New Zealand stores. So it just requires a bit of vigilance. It requires a bit of collective ownership. So we all need to play our part with any kind of online retailers. If parents can keep those 6 S's in mind, that's the best evidence advice that we can give to families that will keep them in good stead for the holidays.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Gemma Rasmussen and Mareta Hunt. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Ben Pierce, and I'm Gwen McClure. Ka kite anō.